Go on.
Okay, this session is on reading assessment, standardized tests, okay? And we're going to be looking at, different from the diagnostic tests. The diagnostic tests tell you what that specific student needs. Standardized tests tell you how does the student score in relation to others. That's the big difference, okay? So we're going to talk about reading and writing. First, about norm reference tests. A norm reference test compares students to a norm group. So there's 100 kids, this kid's age or grade, they all took the same test, and where is the student? Is he second percentile? Is he 98th percentile? Anytime you hear norm reference test, you should think of that normal curve. Okay? Because what norm reference tests do is stack one kid up against another, basically, to say, how is their score? Is it better than 98 out of 100 kids his age or grade? Or is it better than only 5 out of 100? Whatever it is, okay?
Okay.
So that's norm reference tests. Criterion reference tests are different because they're mastery tests. And in a mastery test, let's say, for example, you want to know, does this student, or do all these students in my class know how to decode consonant, vowel, consonant words? So what you would do is you'd make up about 5 examples of consonant, vowel, consonant words, and then you'd have the kids, and you'd have others, but that one criterion would be for that skill. And if the kids got, 3 out of 5, if they got 80% on the test, you could say, yes, they've mastered that criterion. So if the whole test is about decoding, there's all these different decoding skills.
Okay.
And if they get 80% correct, it's important to understand that 80th percentile doesn't tell you exactly how many got correct, skills. It just says they did better than 80 out of 100 kids on the test.
Okay.
Whereas if the kid got 80% on this decoding test, it means he correctly answered 80% of all the decoding questions that you asked. So you can see that norm reference tests are pretty good for screening kids, for finding those kids who need to be looked at further. For example, your school might say, we're going to look at all kids who scored at the 25th percentile or lower, because we're really concerned about them failing. Criterion reference test will tell you which kids know this content, these standards.
Okay.
Is that kind of clear?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So, what kind of questions to ask and which instruments to use? If your question is, how well is this student doing in comparison to other students his or age grade, then you do want a norm reference test. Because you want to know, are they above average, or below average?
Okay.
Which of the kids do I need to worry about? Which of the kids seem to be right on track where they should be? Which of the kids seem to be advanced? Okay? And in case you're not familiar with all of these, are all norm reference tests. The first one is group ones. ITBS is Iowa Test of Basic Skills. It's a nationally norm reference test that a lot of school districts use, more so in the past than currently.
I was going to say, that's been around for a while.
It has,
Iowa.
years and years and years. A lot of school districts use NWEA now. You might have heard that, or the MAP test.
Okay.
If you've heard that, it's the same kind of thing. It's a norm reference test. However, they also claim that they can do criterion reference. They can, within this test, say what specific skills kids need. Okay? CAT refers to California Achievement Test.
Okay.
So that's another one like the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. Not used as much in the Midwest, but it's the same thing. And it'll have more than just reading, spelling, and language arts. It'll probably also have math. It might have even social studies and things, but for our purposes, we're looking at reading, spelling, and language arts. Okay? NAEP is National Assessment of Educational Progress. That's often called the Nation's Report Card.
Okay.
And Congress declared way back in 1972 that there needed to be this national sampling of students all over the United States to look at how well are they doing in reading and math and then other subjects also. So lots of times you'll hear a lot about this NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress. Now the WJ is the Woodcock-Johnson Test of Achievement. We'll be seeing that later in this course. That's an individual achievement test in a wide variety of areas. Of course, reading is part of it. And so we'll look at all the different reading, spelling, and writing subtests of the Woodcock-Johnson later. It's individual. It's the one that's most often used to qualify kids for learning disability service.
Okay.
Okay.
Did they, by any chance, did Jefferson just give that?
Not as they would never give it as an individual to all the students.
Okay.
Are you thinking they just gave one of some?
They just
test?
gave some test. We just got results of some test. And I was going to call the teacher and ask
Okay.
exactly what,
It's hard to say for sure. The MCAs, the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments, I think will be coming up next month. They may have given an achievement test like the ITBS or like the MAP test.
Okay. Because it was verbal, nonverbal,
Oh,
and
okay. It's sort of a group-administered look at academic aptitude. There are a number
and
of them.
reasoning.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. There are a number of those.
Okay.
Okay. The GORT-4, Gray Oral Reading Test 4, actually is an informal reading inventory that has been nationally normed. So you can use it as an informal reading inventory to find the reading level. You can also look at the norms of it. It's an individual reading test.
Okay.
And we won't be learning that in this class, but you will in the upper level advanced diagnosis and remediation.
Okay.
Because it's a quick informal reading inventory. It is not as good as the QRI that we use. It's not as in-depth, but it has the advantage of having these national norms.
Okay.
So, and then this says the RAT-3. As you know, we're into the RAT-4, Wide Range Achievement Test, 4th edition. It's been around for years and years and years. Nationally standardized. We'll see it today. You'll see a list of spelling words that start from, it can be given anywhere from preschool to 70 years old. There's norms all the way up. And then there's a list of single words to read. There's also a math part, which we won't be given. So I've always found that the RAT, which is now in the 4th edition, is a really good starting place to kind of know where to start with the other tests for students. So we'll be seeing that later. So the first two the first row of tests are group administered, ITBS, CAT, and the NAEP. And then the last 3 sets have to be individually administered.
Okay.
And remember that the scores you get tell you how well is this student doing in comparison to other students his or her age or grade. Okay? That's what makes it norm referenced. Now, if we go back now to criterion referenced, how well has this student mastered the important skills of this curriculum? That's criterion referenced. And our best criterion reference test that's widely given in Minnesota is the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments, because they can say this student has mastered these sets of skills and is proficient. This student is not proficient, is not progressing as he or she should. Okay? So those are the 2 main kinds of standardized reading tests. So let's talk about comparing them. Okay.
Right.
If you look at this chart, if you look at a norm reference test, 50% of the students will get any one item right. A really good discriminatory item will be where only 50% get them right. But with a criterion reference test, you want 80% of the kids to get that right because you want to show mastery of it.
So the 50% is expected?
Yep.
Okay.
If you get an item where, say, 90% of the kids get it right, it's not a very good item. It doesn't distinguish.
Okay.
You want one that separates the kids when you're doing a norm reference test. Okay?
So you get that bell?
Yep, you get the bell. If you have a good test and if you give it to enough kids, you will get the bell. Okay? The norm reference test compares students to each other, whereas the criterion reference test compares a student to the standards. Does he know this? My example before. Does he know how to decode? And does he specifically know how to do the decoding of all these different kinds of words? Would be a criterion reference test. Whereas if we would do that as a norm reference, you would just say, okay, who got really high on this decoding test and who got low? Mm-hmm. So you could identify those who need help, but you wouldn't know what they'd need. Whereas with a criterion reference, you'd know what skills they need. Okay? The content that's used. In a norm reference test, you want a wide range of items, of questions, because that's going to distinguish the kids. It's going to separate the high achievers from the low. Criterion referenced, it's more tight. You want to know, do they know this specific content at this grade level? Okay. Again, I'll come back to decoding. Decoding is really important in first grade. So rather than test all of reading that you possibly could, you focus just on decoding.
All right.
Okay? Now, how the results are reported, with a norm reference test, you're going to get a percentile rank, and that means a second percentile means scoring at no better than 2 out of 100 kids. 50th percentile means 50% of the kids scored higher, 50% lower, basically. Okay? Standard scores, we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. With criterion reference test, you're going to get information about who succeeded, who failed, what their proficiency levels are.
Okay.
So when you get MCA results, that'll be listed for each child individually, for each class in a school, for each subgroup. And that's essentially how schools are identified as not making adequate yearly progress, is if they have too big a percentage of kids, let's say in a subgroup of English language learners, who don't score at proficiency, then they're in AYP, corrective action. Mm-hmm. Okay? And it's really unfortunate because it makes it sound like the whole school is failing. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes.
And really what's happening is it's focusing on the fact that there's this one group that needs extra help, and probably everybody else is fine, but having one group not make it over a number of years can put the entire school into this failure category. It's very frustrating. Mm-hmm. So
yes,
let's talk about understanding test scores. Now I wanted to go first into the uses and the misuses. Okay? With norm reference tests, you can get standard scores. A standard score, and at X, it actually should have a bar above it. It's X bar. And in parentheses, that's standard deviation.
Okay.
What that means is that the average score at the 50th percentile is going to be 100. And then at the other ends of the bars, you'll see that pretty soon, it'll be 15 is the standard deviation. So 68% of the kids are going to fall within plus or minus 15. So minus 15 from 100 is 85. So in that standard score of 85, plus 15 is 115. 68% of your kids are going to fall within that band. Now, some of them use 10 as that 50th percentile with a standard deviation of 3. And you will be seeing that in some of our tests. I'll be pointing them out to you.
Okay.
And if this isn't real clear yet, hang on.
Okay.
It'll come. It'll come. This one takes a while. All right. The other kind of scores that you get invariably are grade and age equivalencies. They're written as G period, E period, or A period, E period.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you right now, don't use them. They're very, very misleading, and I'll tell you why in just a little while, but that's a type of score you'll get. And then you'll get what are called stay nines or standard nines. And basically what it does is it takes this distribution of all of the kids and it divides them up into numbers 1 through 3 are below average, 4 through 6 are in that average range, and 7 through 9 are above average. Okay? The ones we're going to use the most are percentile ranks because they're the best understood. Okay? So those are all the types of scores. You'll be working with them on the protocols. And we will continually go through them in this course. But let me talk to you about the normal curve distribution. Notice that right here where it says 0, if you go down, that's the 50th percentile. Okay?
Okay.
Notice that on either side of this, there are 34% of the kids. It's a little bit of a fraction above 2, but you can't. To me, I don't split kids. I just round it off.
Yeah, yeah.
So if it's a normal distributed group, and if you have over 100 in a group taking a test, usually you'll get this kind of a distribution. 68% of them, or if there's 100 of them, 68 out of 100 are going to fall right in here, right in what's called the average range. Okay? And that average range, interestingly, goes from the 16th percentile on up to the 85th percentile. Okay? If you look down,
It's a pretty big.
it's a big,
Yeah.
It is. But a lot of people seem to think that the 30th percentile is really, really far from the 50th. But if you look at it, see how close they clump? There's not a big difference between them here. There's not a big difference. Whereas they start to really spread out. Look at how much further from 85 the 99th percentile is. There's an error here. This one plus 1 standard deviation should be the 13, or actually 14%.
14?
Yeah. Should be 14% below and 14% above. Okay? So 14% of your kids are going to be between the 16th percentile and the 2nd percentile, in that range. And then another 14% are going to be between the 85th percentile and the 98th percentile. Okay? And then only 2% of your kids are going to be higher than that. Okay? And only 2% will be lower than that, sadly. If you look down here, you can see the stay nines and how they spread out. See how 1, 2, 3 is right there, and then 4, 5, 6 clump in the middle. So, and then so you get an idea of where all these scores are when you see them. Your standard scores are down here. 100 lines up with the 50th percentile.
Okay. And that goes along. Yep. All
Yeah.
right.
And 85 standard score lines up with the 16th percentile. Okay? Those kids who are at the 2nd percentile are going to have a standard score of 70. And then you can go the other way. 115 lines up with the 85th percentile. And 130 lines up with that. Oh, well. Let's go on to this since I clicked.
Okay.
One thing I want you to emblazon on your forehead and anywhere you need to is don't report grade equivalencies. Okay? 4.2 grade equivalency does not mean your student is performing at 4th grade levels. And many teachers and especially parents will assume that all the time. I can't tell you how often I've had somebody come in and say, well, I'm teaching 2nd grade. Well, Sarah scored 5.5 and you don't have her reading 5th grade material. She should be in 5th grade material. It doesn't mean she can read 5th grade material. It may mean that your child got the same number of questions correct as the average child in 4th grade, 4.2, but maybe not the same ones.
Yes. Okay.
So, for example, a 4th grader who got the same number correct might have just kind of blown off the easy ones and answered some harder ones. So it just means got the same number correct, And in fact, it may even be an extrapolated score. And what that means is test developers might test only 3 grade levels. Maybe they only test 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And then they extrapolate up and down what the score would be for 1st and 2nd and 7th and 8th. So it's an estimated score.
Okay.
Okay. So grade equivalencies don't mean that a student is performing at that grade. It just means they got the same number correct, or they got the same extrapolated score, whatever would be the case. Okay. Do report percentiles, because the percentiles indicates where your student's rank is in relation to others of his age or grade, whatever the norms are based on. So, for example, the 60th percentile means that she scored better than 60 out of 100 students her age or grade. Pretty easy, don't you think, for both you as a teacher to understand and for parents?
And a parent, yep, definitely.
So, for example, if little Sarah in 2nd grade got 4.2, she'd probably be at the 60th, 65th percentile, maybe in 70th percentile, which means she is needs to be challenged. She's not reading at grade level, but she's not necessarily reading 4th grade level.
Yeah.
Okay? So the percentiles are the least likely to be misinterpreted. On your test protocols, you're going to be doing standard scores, and you're going to be doing percentiles. And I'll be telling you, don't even write in the grade equivalencies. Okay? Even though there's a space with them.
Spot for them.
Yep. So we're going to practice some with derived scores. Actually, I think on this one we're going to skip this. I don't think I had got that ready.
Okay.
Because let's go on to talk about how do you evaluate whether the test you're thinking of buying for district or using is a good test or not. You want to know that it's going to get consistent results with kids, that it's got good norms, right? You don't want to do one as, for example, years and years ago, I got really excited because I saw there was an expressive vocabulary test. And I bought it, and when I got it, I saw that, and I'm working here in the Midwest, and I saw that it was normed on, like 200 kids in San Francisco. I had no reason to believe that my kids here in the Midwest would be similar to these kids in San Francisco, so I didn't use it because I didn't feel like it was a good norming population. Now, the interesting part of that is that company has taken the test, actually the PPVT company has taken that expressive vocabulary test and nationally normed it. So along with the receptive vocabulary test, they now have national norms on this expressive vocabulary test. And it's a really good combination to get both of them.
No, that's the flip.
Yes, that's the flip one.
All right.
So the PPVT is where you see, they see 4 pictures, you say the name, like point to Bannister, and they tell you which one is Bannister, for example. That's receptive because they don't have to say anything. The EVT, expressive vocabulary test that we do in the advanced course, is set up the same. So they'll see just one picture, and you'll ask them to name it, or you'll ask a question about it. So it calls up names or understanding of being able to talk about it.
Okay. So this test,
this is receptive.
You are having them point to it. They don't need they are hearing the vocab word and looking at the picture. The other test, they actually have to pull the word up themselves.
Exactly.
All right.
And so for kids who have naming problems, the other one is very interesting. We'll talk about that later. Okay, we have some that test verbal fluency and naming speed. We just alluded to that a little bit with the verbal fluency. The RANRAS, Rapid Automatized Naming, Rapid Alternative Stimuli, I believe is the second part of it because it's new. Test the ability to call up words over and over and over, how fast you can do it. And I think we've talked about that, about kids who have word retrieval problems, where they're standing there, that thing, stuff.
Yep. Oh, yeah. That's the word.
Or the retrieval problems I have now with remembering people's names. And so Megan is standing in front of me, and I'm trying to call up her name, and I call her Melanie.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what her name is, but then one that comes up is not her name. Mm-hmm. Those are word retrieval problems.
Okay.
And this one is a really good one for predicting word retrieval problems or for identifying it.
Okay.
And then the test of silent word reading fluency is really interesting because it tests silent fluency. It tests how fast kids can read silently, single words, okay? Most of the fluency tests that we've had so far have been where they have to read out loud and you time them, like with the CBA or with the QRI or running record. Running record usually does not time, traditionally not. But this is a silent one, so it can be given to all the kids at once.
Is this the one where all the words are in one big line and they have to draw the lines in between?
Yes, between the words.
Okay.
Exactly.
And what do they have, 3 minutes?
It's 3 minutes,
okay.
And so you can see how accurate they are and how fast they can go as they do that.
Okay.
And then we have some reading, spelling, and written language tests. And I mentioned before the wide range achievement test, where in reading they will get a list of words that get progressively much more difficult, and you'll just have them read. We'll be training on that in just a little while. And then in spelling, you'll dictate spelling words to them, and after they've missed 10 in a row, then you stop it. Okay. Because this is a survey test that goes all the way from even preschool, but I wouldn't use it in preschool. I'd use it from first grade through adult. Okay, and then the TOWEL 4 is now in the 4th edition, test of written language. That one's also norm referenced, and we're just going to use one part of it, which is the story writing part. So these are all to be given individually, okay, and these are the ones we're going to learn. But before we do, you need to, if you're going to buy a norm reference test or use one that's already in your school, there's some really important questions that you need to ask. And one of them is validity. This is an important concept to know, too, because it's on the reading specialist test. Okay? Validity basically says, yes, highlight. Does the test measure what it's supposed to measure? So if it says it's a reading comprehension test, but most of what it does is assess word identification or decoding, it's not going to measure. It isn't valid for what it says it's going to measure. So that's validity. Another one is reliability. If kids take the test this week and then you give them the same test a couple weeks later, do they get about the same score? So if a kid gets 80 one week and then only gets 25 the next, and that's pretty general, that's not a reliable test. Okay, so that's one way that reliability is looked at. Another way it's looked at is it internally consistent? Are all of the items testing the same kind of thing?
From grade to grade?
No, just within any one grade.
Oh, okay.
Or do those items vary from decoding to comprehension to fluency to all kinds of things?
Okay.
And don't do enough of whatever, if it's reading comprehension. So we'll talk about how they do that internally consistent. Well, maybe we should do it now. Basically, internal consistency is judged by taking, let's say you have a 50-item test, and you take all the odd items out and all the even items in another pile, and you treat it as though it's 2 different tests. So you take a correlation. You see how well the scores that a kid gets on the odd items corresponds to the score on the even items. So you take all the kids' test scores, pass, fail, item by item, and so all the odds go in one pile, all the even numbers go in another, and then you see, did a kid get 80% on both of them, or close to the same?
Okay.
or on some of them did they get a really low score and on the other part of it they got a high score. If they did, then there wouldn't be a high correlation and it would not be consistent. It would have too many other things in it.
Involved in.
Yeah. Now, you also need to take a look at that norming sample. So, were there sufficient children tested? Okay. Generally, there should be at least 100 children for each age or grade. Okay? So, for example, in that test that I was telling you about years ago, the expressive vocabulary test, 200 kids, and it was across grades 1 through 6. Well, no, that doesn't mean 100 per grade then. That by itself would say there's not enough of them. You also want to ask, are the students in the norming sample similar to my students? And in the case I gave you, San Francisco kids are probably not similar to the Western, fairly rural or small town, okay? If you have a well-normed national test, it should be similar because they will take a lot of care to make sure that they have Midwestern, Southwestern, Southeastern, Northeastern. They'll make sure that they have kids from low income, middle income, high income, that they have a similar percentage of Hispanic and black and white and Asian Americans. All of that will be looked at, geographic. But you should be looking for that so that they didn't just norm it on Florida, for example, or Texas, and then expect that you'd use it here in the Midwest. Okay.
And all of this information is...
It's in the manuals.
In the manuals.
It's in the manuals.
Right.
And if you were in class the second session, you'd be digging it out in just a few minutes with people. We're just going to go through it with you. But, what I'd actually do is have people divide up and take a manual and dig it out and then report it. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, so the nationally normed test, as I said, does it reflect the diversity of the students geographically, age-wise, socioeconomic status, and ethnically. Okay.
All right.
So this is where we would ordinarily in class start to divide it up. So what do the manuals say about the norming samples? What I would do is ask one group to take the PPVT-4 and using those questions we just had the slide before, dig out validity, reliability, and the norming sample descriptions, right? RAN-RAS. Rapid automatized naming, same thing. What does the manual say? Is this a test you want to use? The TOWEL 4. I'm sorry if this still says 3 on it, but we would want the TOWEL 4. And the test of silent word reading fluency. So there's all those. So what we would start first by going through those to say, what do each of these say about the norming samples? In other words, are students similar to the ones we'll be testing included in the norming groups for these 4 tests, right? Okay, so...
Okay, what was the TOWEL 4?
TOWEL 4 is Test of Written Language.
Oh, thank you.
4th edition.
All right.
And then the last one is Test of Silent Word Reading Fluency.
Yeah. Okay.
And then another question is reliability. Test, retest. Will the students obtain a similar score if they're retested 2 weeks later, for example, or a week later? When a student takes 2 different forms of the test, many of these tests have a Form A and a Form B. So if you give Form A of the PPVT to kids, and then you give Form B to the same kids, do they get similar scores on both?
Okay.
That's reliability also.
And Form A and Form B are the same thing, like a green and an orange.
Correct.
So I think we have green and orange down at the clinic.
Yes, on the old rat. Now it's blue and green.
Oh, okay.
Yes, those are 2 alternative forms.
Okay.
Alternate forms, right.
Yes.
And it shouldn't matter whether you give them the blue test or the green test. Even though the words are different, it's
Same
been
thing.
equated so that they're reliable. Right?
Okay.
Then internal consistency, and I talked about that. If you split a test results of kids in half, so you have odd numbers in one and even numbers in the other, do their scores on the 2 halves correlate highly, indicating that the items test the same construct?
Okay.
Same idea. Then here's what you want to look for. This is very important to remember these reliability guidelines, because if you see 0.90 or higher, you can make individual decisions. In other words, helping to qualify a child for special education, for placement in another place. To make that kind of a decision, you need at least 0.90 reliability or higher. Okay?
Okay.
Now, if you're looking for grouping decisions, like within a classroom or within a school, what group of kids should we give extra help to or whatever, 0.80 to 0.89 is going to be fine for that. And then if you are doing, like with a curriculum-based assessment, just screening for who needs further assessment, who do we need to look at, 0.70 is high enough.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yep.
Okay. So for reliability, you want to be able to see that in the manuals. So what do these manuals say about reliability? This is where I would have the students actually fill it in, and we do have that filled in here. Oh, I thought he did.
No, those are questions.
Okay. Validity guidelines. Construct validity is, does the test measure what it says it measures? Is it consistent with the theory that's supposed to represent the test? So, for example, if this is a reading test that purports to measure the 5 benchmarks, or the big five of reading, of accuracy, fluency, of phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary and comprehension, does it really do that, or does it just focus on one? That's construct validity. Okay. Content validity is where, so I made up a test for kindergarten children, and in order to say, is this a good one for kindergarten children, I actually sent it to a lot of kindergarten teachers and said, are these concepts that kids would be exposed to? You'd expect them to know. Vocabulary items they'd know. Are the pictures readable by kindergarten children? So I'm using experts in the field to say, yes, this is a good test or not. Pearson, our new testing company in Minnesota, just did that with the new reading licensure test. They brought in experts around the state and had them look at every single test item and say, yes, this content reflects our standards, and it's written in a way that should distinguish those who are ready to be reading teachers. So that's content validity.
Okay.
Now, concurrent or criterion means, does it correlate highly with a test that's already out there? Two tests that measure the same things, do they get similar scores or ranks on both? Okay, I'll give you an example. You know the PPVT, where there's 4 pictures and the child points. It's an individual test. I made up a kindergarten vocabulary test where there's 4 pictures going across in a row, and they take it in a group. So I say wild, circle wild, and there's 4 pictures there, and the picture, if they get it right, should be I think it's a mouse or something. In actual fact, many of the kindergarten kids circle a cat that looks wild. So that means that they don't know the deepest meaning of wild. But in any case, it's a vocabulary test that's similar to this individual one, except it's given in a group. So I wanted to see whether it would have concurrent validity or criterion validity. So I gave both the individual PPVT to children, and then I gave my vocabulary test, which doesn't have the same items, by the way. It's the same kind of test, but it's different items. And the correlation should be, the correlation should be 0.6 or higher. I've got 0.8 though. If you would correct that, please. Should be 0.6 or higher. Okay. And the correlation between the two is actually something like 0.72. So it means that kids would get essentially the same score on both of these tests, whether they took this individual one that had been around for years and was well respected and validated, and this brand new one.
Okay.
That's what concurrent or criterion means. Predictive validity means, does a high score on this test predict future performance? So, for example, if a student gets a high score on an ACT, does that predict college success? Predictive should be 0.6 or higher. And by the way, the ACT only predicts freshman grades. It does not predict persistence in college or success at college. Isn't that interesting?
Really?
Oh, yeah. It was designed to predict freshman grades, and it does that well, but we need something else. And people are starting to see that actually in this huge study, what predicted persistence in college to graduation 6 years later actually was high school GPA. And it didn't matter whether the kids came from a low-performing school with low expectations or a very rigorous school. A high school GPA of 3.0 or higher was really very predictive that that kid would persist. And when you stop to think about it, getting that kind of a GPA in whatever school you're in means you got good study habits, you've got the desire to work hard. So I think it's that GPA was a marker for what we are starting to call grit.
Okay.
The grit to hang in there.
Yeah.
And by the way, some kids with lower GPAs than that did well in the school too, so there's other factors that need to be done. Anyway, that was a little bird walk.
That's really interesting. I did not know that about the ACT.
Yeah.
Which totally makes sense, though.
Now, what did the manual say about the validity? Apparently, I don't have the same one up here as you have, because in fact, there are guidelines for it in one of our PowerPoints, but I don't have them in here.
Oh, no.
No, it's not on this one.
Okay.
Anyway, you'd need to be using those guidelines to determine. Now, all of these tests meet those criteria. I would not have chosen them for people to use in this class, in this program, if they hadn't met the criteria of reliability, validity. Okay? But it's important that you know how to do that, because some salesman will come along and try to convince the school that this is the best test out there, and you need to independently take a look. Say, get the manual and say, I really want to look at these issues. Did they test enough kids? Were the kids tested similar to our kids? Those are norming samples issues. Is it reliable? Is it valid? So you have your criteria for those. So your bottom line decisions need to be, is this appropriate for your students? And again, I go back to that decision I made years ago that I would not use this expressive vocabulary test because it wasn't normed on kids here. Now I will use it because it's been nationally normed. Okay. Is the test reliable enough for screening decisions? Do you remember what the correlation coefficient needs to be for screening decisions?
0.7.
0.70. Is it reliable enough for grouping? Is
0.8.
Right. And for individual program planning?
0.9.
You got it. Okay. Is this test going to give you useful information? That's the bottom line. As you look at the test, is it just something to send the kids through, or will it tell you something about how to teach, or at least tell you which kids should be looked at further? Right? Okay. And that's it for this part. Thank you.
That's it.